All right, fans, here we go with the main event of the evening, the fight of the century. Muhammad Ali smoking Joe Frazier. It's showtime.
Welcome to the WBC Talks. The WBC is so proud, so happy. We have designated 2021 as the year of boxing because we're going to be celebrating life through boxing. And today, we're gonna be remembering the greatest fight in the history of our sport, the fight of the century. And I am just so proud and so happy to welcome this great panel of boxing lovers, boxing historians, some of the most influential in the history of our sport. So I'm gonna begin by age. Let me see if I'm getting it right. So we're gonna begin with Jimmy Lennon Jr., a Hall of Fame ring announcer and a great person, a great friend. Hello, Jimmy, how are you?
Very good, Mauricio. You got it right. I was 12 years old when the fight took place. I have some vivid memories of it, but I did not see it live, or I did not see it in closed circuit, but looking forward to chatting about it.
Absolutely. Next on the age scale, we have one of the greatest, also a Hall of Famer broadcasters, a dear friend, Jim Blampley, who was 21 years old when this fight happened.
Thank you, Mauricio, and so great to see all the other people who are here on the panel. Yes, I was 21. I was a college student struggling to graduate at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, where I'm now living. I, like Jimmy Lennon, didn't see the live telecast of the fight because I couldn't afford it. And I saw the delay several days later on ABC Sports, hoping that the delay would show me that the decision for the fight was not valid. That didn't turn out to be the case.
Great, great. Next, without a doubt, the greatest photographer in the history of the sport, Hall of Famer, Neil Leifer, who is going to tell us great stories and who was only 22 years old at that time of the fight.
Actually, I added wrong. Mathematics were never my thing. I was 28 years old in 1971.
And, but you look 21, Jimmy. I mean, you look 21, right?
And I was lucky enough to be on the apron, ringside. I was in Joe Frazier's corner. And I was in Joe Frazier's corner, but rooting for Muhammad.
Excellent. And next, someone very special to the sport of boxing. We're going to be celebrating in December precisely a great 90 years old of the greatest promoter of the sport. And I'm very happy to welcome Bob Arum, who just gave me permission to call him Bob instead of Mr. Arum, which I will do now from now. Okay. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you, Mauricio. It's great to be here. You know, again, when you look back on a personal basis, I was a relative young man. I was 39 years of age at the time of the fight. I was there. I was Ali's lawyer for that fight. And I remember all the backstories and all the intrigue in getting that fight on. And I have great, great memories of that day, except for how the result turned out in the ring with Ali losing. And nobody ever in our group ever believed Ali would lose a fight on that night in Madison Square Garden.
Who could give us a short introduction of what was happening in 1971, what was happening with Ali, what was happening with Frazier, what was happening in the USA? I just want to hear you out. Please feel free to tell us anything about 1971.
As the old man in the group, I think I can paint the picture. And a lot of it is from the personal basis. I had been Ali's lawyer and promoter in the late 60s before he was forced to suspend his career because of his position on the draft, his refusal to be drafted. And Ali was out 3.5 years. and then he came back around in 1970, but he missed 3.5 years, the peak of his career. And at that particular point in time, the United States was engulfed in a tremendously acrimonious political dispute. And that revolved around the Vietnamese War. Remember, it was 71. Nixon was president in his second term. And despite his promises of stopping the war continued. And the country was divided. Years before, they were heavily in favor of continuing the war. And by 71, there was a significant portion of the population opposed to the Vietnam War. And the atmosphere in that arena was such that it divided into two groups, essentially. One was the people, generally white people, who still supported the war, and they were the majority of the people in attendance in the arena. It's hard to believe now, but most of the fans, or the majority of the fans in the arena, were supporting Frazier. Ali had a great contingent of people. The Black population appeared to be solidly behind him, and many white liberals were behind Ali. But in that arena, it was predominantly, as I remember it, Frazier fans. And so this fight, which was a fight between two undefeated heavyweights, because when Ali couldn't fight, we organized a tournament with all the fighters, with 8 fighters, to get a temporary successor to Ali. And Jimmy Ellis won that tournament. Madison Square Garden had convinced Frazier and Yank Durham to go for the New York State version of the heavyweight title, and Frazier fought Buster Mathis and won that title. And then prior to this fight, Frazier fought Jimmy Ellis, I guess, for the championship of the interim heavyweight division, and Frazier knocked out Jimmy Ellis. And so on the night of the fight, there was Ali, who would come back. He had the fight with Jerry Quarry in Atlanta. And then Top Rank was organized then. We had a prior company to do Ali's fight against Oscar Bonavena, December 7th, 1970, where it was a very, very good fight, and Ali knocked out Bonavena in the 15th round. And that set the stage for this great fight in March of 1971. And up to that point, I'll talk the promotional aspects, fighters were paid largely on percentage. And a guy came in from California named Jerry Perenchio, who was backed by the owner of the Lakers and the Forum, Jack Kent Cooke, and said, no, forget about this. I'm going to offer each fighter $2.5 million a piece to do that fight. That was an unconscionably large amount that he paid. And on that basis, Ali said that he would go along with it and asked me to be his attorney in the negotiations. And we entered into the contract, Bruce Wright on behalf of Frazier, and we agreed on a purse of $2,500,000 each. And Perenchio really, Judge Hoffines, who owned the Astrodome, has said to me, I'll give you the money, you do the fight. And I said, Judge, I'm not going to take your money because there's no way you can come out, because at that point in time, closed circuit, which we didn't have pay-per-view, was selling for $5 and $10 a person, a ticket to these closed circuit fights. And Perenchio busted up everything. He ended up charging in most places $25. And now he was looking for a place to put the fight, and Frazier and Yank Durham were pushing for Madison Square Garden because they were loyal to the Garden. And he went to the Garden and he gave them the ticket prices he wanted to charge. He wanted to charge, I think it was, I remember, $500 for ringside. And that was like crazy money. Remember, we're back in the early 70s. Dollar was worth a lot more than it is now. And Harry Markson said, no, I'm not going to let you go higher than $100 for ringside. And Teddy Brenner stepped in and said, Harry, you got to be a little flexible. And so they settled on $150 for a ringside ticket. Now, because I was Ali's lawyer, I bought 6 best ringside. You know, remember the Garden had this raised ringside right in the center. And I bought 6 tickets. And I remember the week before the fight and leading up to the fight, I was offered $2,500 a ticket, you know, crazy money, $15,000 for my 6 tickets. And I refused because I brought my then wife, Fred Hoffheinz and his wife, and Jack O'Connell, who ran the Astrodome, and his wife. And so I was in Madison Square Garden, you know, sitting center ringside, the raised ringside, and confident, beyond confident, that Ali, as usual, would find a way to win the fight. And it didn't happen because clearly Frazier won that fight. I believe he won 9 out of 15 rounds. This is before your father reduced the number of rounds, Mauricio, to 12. But it was 15 rounds, and Frazier clearly won 9 rounds, including a knockdown in the last round, which counted, you know, it was a round system. It wasn't a point system. So he didn't get extra credit for the knockdown. But he won 9 rounds and Ali won 6. And Frazier, to my shock, became the undisputed heavyweight champion.
Nice recap. Jim Lampley, what was going through your mind? You were in college. How did you leave that experience?
Well, I was not only in college, I was sometimes out in the street demonstrating against the Vietnam War. So I was very much a part of the socio-political fabric that Bob referred to. And Bob is 100% correct in establishing if you were a supporter of the American intervention in Vietnam and you thought that that was a good political idea, you were not a fan of Muhammad Ali, who had, of course, been in effect exiled from his boxing career for more than 3 years by refusing to accept the draft and go into the army. So that was a huge philosophical dividing line for people going into the fight. And it was one of the reasons I was rooting for Ali, but I would have rooted for him anyway. Cassius Marcellus Clay was my all-time childhood hero. I was a white kid who was raised in a small town in the South and very assertively schooled by my mother to understand that I would never subscribe to racism in any way, that I would resist that with every fiber in my body, that my uncles and cousins who claimed to be members of the Ku Klux Klan would never be my shoulder-to-shoulder soldiers, that I would always opt for the opposite. So when I saw an 18-year-old kid win an Olympic gold medal in Rome in 1960 and began to follow him and realized that he was using a slave name, Cassius Marcellus Clay, to taunt the white establishment, you could not have drawn up fictionally a better hero for me. He was my everything. And and so for him to come back and to have this opportunity was a tremendous stimulus to my excitement and my involvement as a human being. But I think it's important to look back and realize Ali's aura has continued to grow and has become so big, and partially as the result of the rumble in the jungle and the upset of George Foreman. There's this tremendous champion style image that attaches to Ali, and a lot of people have forgotten how dominant and how prominent Joe Frazier was at that time. And a lot of people forget, for instance, that after he won this fight against Ali, and eventually went to fight George Foreman in the Caribbean, I think it was Jamaica, where that fight took place, Joe Frazier was a big favorite to beat George Foreman, despite the size differential. And despite what ultimately happened in that fight, the belief of the general public was that Joe Frazier couldn't lose to somebody with less experience and less ring background than he had. So, it was not an upset for Frazier to beat Ali in Madison Square Garden.
Oh, no, Jim, get the facts right. Frazier lost to Foreman 2 years after that fight.
Right.
In other words, Frazier lost to Foreman in '73, I believe, was in Jamaica.
But he had not lost after the Madison Square Garden. Right. He was still unbeaten when he went to Jamaica.
That's correct, but he fought tomato cans after he fought Ali. Ziglowitz and Daniels. And
right.
He took Ali out on the road, and he fought every 2 months against all measure of fighters. So even during that period where Frazier clearly was a champion because he had knocked out, I think because he had won a decision over Ali, most of the public still considered Ali the heavyweight champion.
Well, they wanted to. Yeah, and the fight was sort of close enough that you could dream, but the knockdown in the 15th round was an exclamation point. It was hard to argue with that. And all I'm saying is that I think over the 50 years since then, people have lost their grasp of what Frazier meant and how big he was, both coming into that fight and coming out of it. So, I learned a lot from Ali. I learned that I didn't own his identity. He could change his name, and I had to go along with that. He taught me my position on the Vietnam War. And one of the things I learned from the fight in Madison Square Garden is that you can lose and still be a hero, still be a champion, right. Still have the same level of public affection that you had going into the fight. It was the fight that probably taught me from the beginning that in every truly great fight, there are two winners. And, that's Tommy Hearns and Ray Leonard. That's Arturo Gatti and Mickey Ward. That's Gennady Golovkin and Canelo Alvarez. In every truly great fight, there are two winners. And I think I first learned that indelibly from March 8, 1971.
Right, but the only unfortunate part that brings up in the promotion was because of the polarization in the country. Ali, never to miss an opportunity, painted Frazier as the white man's fighter, and that led to calling Frazier an Uncle Tom, which clearly he was not. And that was unfortunate. That was really stuck in Frazier's craw, as well it should. Frazier was a Southern boy who had come to Philadelphia. He was as proud of his blackness as Ali was in his way. And that, again, was the only, other than Ali losing the fight, was the only bad taste I had in my mouth about that promotion, was the way Frazier was demeaned in the public by Ali as being the white man's fighter.
But Bob, it's very interesting because he also did, he was even worse when the fight went to Manila, the Thriller in Manila. I'm going to
He continued on, right. And
But
also the second fight that he did in New York in '74.
I'd photographed both of them in one-on-one studios, covers for Sports Illustrated shoots. And I realized, and I watched them I photographed them on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. And I realized that the minute you had any size audience, it could have been thousands of people, it could have been 3 people, Ali turned on that side of him. If you could avoid that, the two of them got along very well. I had them twice alone. And the most notable one was before the Thriller in Manila, I did a cover for Sports Illustrated that had Don King, who promoted the fight, and Ali and Frazier. And they were coming to the studio, the Life magazine studio, to pose. And I knew if I let anyone else in the room, Frazier would get upset maybe and leave. I needed to keep them there. So we closed the door. I wouldn't let anyone in the room. Ali came in by himself. There was a little entourage with him. We didn't let him in. I had Don King in the room, Ali, Frazier, and my assistant. There was no one for Ali to entertain. The two of them, I had them there for 45 minutes, maybe an hour, in gloves and trunks. If you remember, they're right
I
next to
remember the pictures.
I will tell you, they were talking about all sorts of things that you wouldn't imagine the two of them talking about before this big fight. They got along great for, I'm saying, maybe 45 minutes. And the funny thing is the cover picture is the only picture that ran that has Ali making a face at Frazier, sort of. It's a very cute picture. And Joe never saw that face. Other than that, for 45 minutes, you would never have believed the taunting and the white man's champion and the gorilla in Manila, because he didn't do that when there was no one to entertain.
And I'll give you a little backstory. Jim mentioned the 3 year plus that Ali couldn't fight. And in those years, Ali, to support himself, spoke at universities, did this well-forgotten Broadway show, the Buck something or other, and scratched out a living. I got him involved with a hamburger company, and they did a public offering, but he wasn't making, particular money. And during that period, Joe Frazier loaned Ali a loan that he never collected on, maybe he gave it to Ali, considerable money to help Ali live during that 3 year period.
And Bob, didn't Joe Frazier actually go to the political capital of Washington, D.C. and intercede to try to get Ali's ban lifted so that he could fight?
100%. And before that fight took place, Jimmy the Greek, you remember Jimmy the Greek? He arranged with Governor Laxalt, who was the governor, to do that fight, which would have been the first fight, in Las Vegas, in Nevada, where each fighter was going to get $300,000 plus a percentage of the revenue. And it was all set with the commission. And I flew in, I'll never forget, to Las Vegas. And I was sitting there with Governor Laxalt, and he got a call. The meeting was in the basement or the basement of a motel in Las Vegas. And they called the governor to the microphone after he had said he was going to get it through. And they called him to a telephone, and he came back. He was white-faced. And I said, "Governor, what's the matter?" He said, "Well, I got a call from Howard Hughes." Really, it was from Bob Mayhew, who was the chief of the Hughes enterprise. And Mayhew said, "Governor, Howard doesn't want this fight to be in Nevada." And, Hughes owned most of the casinos at that point. He had bought them out for the mob, and he was the big backer of Laxalt and the Republican Party in Nevada. And I said, "Governor, I'm going to withdraw my application for a license to that fight." And Laxalt, years later, when he was part of the Reagan group, he was still a senator. He became a senator in Nevada. always came up and thanked me for saving him from the embarrassment by withdrawing the application.
Jimmy Lennon, you were, of course, the young kid when this fight happened.
I tell you, I was in junior high. It was a school night. You know, I remember the hype building up to the fight. I don't remember so much of the political and socioeconomic and so forth, the racial, but I certainly remembered, you know, me growing up as a fight fan all my life and going to boxing. Those were my heroes from Ali and Frazier. I love them both. But I can remember that everyone was talking about the fight and everyone cared and everyone had a call and there were rumors going, oh, Joe Frazier soaks his head in rock salt and he cannot be hurt. And, you know, but that night, my dad, Jimmy Lennon, and my mother got all dressed up, went to the closed circuit to see it. And I was home alone. I had my TV dinner in front of the TV, waiting for updates on the news on the fight. So periodically I'd hear what was happening, but didn't get a chance to see a lot of it. But I do remember also reading afterwards, you know, the injuries that they both suffered from this fight. When you see the fight, you can just imagine the kind of punishment they took. And also reading that Ali, you know, to Jim Lampley's point that you can be a hero and still lose, it seemed like he was already strategizing for the rematch because he refused to go to the hospital with that terribly swollen jaw. And Joe Frazier went to the hospital. And so Ali was already starting the mental games in the rematch to win that rematch.
You remember the promotions we did for Ali afterwards, right after that fight, where Ali was, you know, strutting around like he was still the champion and drawing crowds like he was still the champion. We did a couple of more fights in the Astrodome for Ali. Took him all around the world, Ireland, and fight in Dublin, a fight in Jakarta, Indonesia. He was the worldwide accepted king of boxing, even though he had lost his fight with Joe Frazier.
Jimmy.
It's amazing what he could do. Amazing. Yeah.
Let's see. Could you give us a little sampler? How would you have been in the center of the ring introducing each one of these fighters?
I'm going to give you a little more than a sampler because I've thought about this. What a dream it would be to announce the fight of the century, which, you know, you were mentioning earlier, maybe the biggest boxing event ever, maybe one of the biggest sporting events. I think ever, it's the biggest sporting event ever. If you would consider what social media would do with that fight today and the undefeated fighters, former gold medalists at the peak of their game, it'd be a thrill for me to announce it. And this is how I would do it. All right, fans, here we go with the main event of the evening, the fight of the century, 15 rounds of boxing scheduled for the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. And now, ladies and gentlemen, live from Madison Square Garden in New York City, it's showtime. Introducing first the challenger, wearing red trunks with white trim, fighting out of Louisville, Kentucky. He weighed in at 215 pounds, undefeated in his campaign with a record of 31 wins, no losses, 25 wins coming by way of knockout. Here's the 1960 Olympic gold medalist, the former undefeated unified heavyweight champion of the world, introducing the popular and colorful, the one and only Muhammad Ali. And his opponent, the defending champion, fighting out of the opposite corner, wearing green trunks with gold trim, fighting out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The 1964 Olympic gold medalist, also undefeated at 26 wins, no losses, 23 wins coming by way of knockout. Here is the undefeated, defending and reigning heavyweight champion of the world, Smokin' Joe Frazier. Ding, 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 ding.
That would have been a lot better.
Jimmy, that was absolutely
play the announcement of the fight by the then ring announcer. I think it was Johnny Addy.
Johnny Addy.
Yeah. I mean, you would have been a real big improvement. Just the way, I mean, you know, but technology and Jimmy Lennon came on after that. As far as technology is concerned, remember, no domestic satellites. The signal was transmitted in the United States by telephone company long lines, only could get 350 closed circuit locations. Very little satellite, international satellite. There was some to the UK, some to Europe, but none to Asia then. They didn't have the satellite to Asia. None to the Mideast. I remember a couple of years ago, it really sticks in my mind. I was meeting with a Saudi guy in Dubai. He's a promoter in the Mideast. Siddiqui, his name. He's a nice guy, obviously much younger than myself, but still, he told me that he recalled that fight. He got up early in the morning in Saudi, and it was on the radio. And he listened to that fight on the radio, entranced. And I remember when I was a kid growing up, late at night, listening on the radio to the Joe Louis fights. So I understood how he felt. But most of the world got the fight on radio at that point.
I love the fact if I was Steven Espinosa, I'd be so happy. Jimmy created Showtime way ahead of its time.
Yeah, and Jimmy pulled off the unbelievable. Even when he announced HBO fights, he would say, "Now it's Showtime."
Neil, how did you get that credential to photograph the fight? What was the process back then?
Well, magazines, unlike newspapers, magazines didn't really have, certainly a magazine like Sports Illustrated didn't have beat photographers. A baseball writer, baseball photographer, football photographer. We covered everything depending on what the biggest events were of the week. And obviously that was the biggest event of the decade, probably, or the year, or many years. And Sports Illustrated was given the opportunity to set up the pool, because as I said, there was so many foreign, there was Parry Match and Stern, Germany, and a bunch of magazines in other parts of Europe and in Asia, all wanted credentials for that fight. And the fact is that there wasn't enough space on the ring apron. So I don't know how he got so tall. That shook me up a little bit. But anyway, so Sports Illustrated was given 2 seats, one for a photographer named Tony Triolo and the other that I had. We had basically, I covered all of Ali's career. I shot 35 of his fights. So I was put in one of the seats, and our photographs were going to be used for magazines all around the world. The only other credentials, photographers on the ring apron were the big New York newspapers and the wire services, Associated Press, United Press, the New York Times, the Daily News. But I was on the ring apron, and our film was going right back. I said Sports Illustrated closed that night, and the pictures were being syndicated all around the world. Except for Sinatra, there were no other people shooting that really were just shooting for themselves. And
before this fight, Neil, you made a unbelievable photo, which is the trademark of Neil Leifer. Let's see it in the screen. That picture when Ali...
I bet it's going to be Cleveland Williams, right?
My favorite.
Knockout of Cleveland. That showed Neil's innovation. I remember him coming to me and saying he wanted it. For me, what showed how great Neil Leifer was. You remember, Neil? You came to me and you wanted to do a camera on the top of the Astrodome.
That's correct.
Shoot down in the ring. And you got that shot when Ali knocked out Cleveland Williams.
It's the only picture that sits in my living room on the wall. I had worked on the construction story with Judge Roy Halfhines when they were building the Astrodome. And I realized that the lighting fixture, because otherwise it was, I think it was $5, $10 a seat in the upper deck and those seats. But if you lowered that, it was so big. If you lowered it, you obstructed view for probably 15,000 seats, 12,000 seats, or whatever the upper.
So many seats there.
And nobody was going to do that.
That's it.
There's the Cleveland Williams.
So I realized you could do such a thing. I mean, I'm really...
Look at that. It looks like a painting.
That's me right there.
Yeah, unbelievable. That to me epitomized Neil Leifer. That took a lot of planning and a lot of vision.
But there's
Great
also,
photo.
unlike most of the other jobs that journalists do at a big event, like a big fight like this, there's photographers, you've got to be so lucky. I was in the right seat. Now, believe me, I've never met a good, modest photographer, so I'm certainly not going to try to say that when I use the word luck, it's not to impress you about how modest I am, because I'm not, I had a very healthy ego about my pictures. But you must be in the right seat. If you look at Ali Liston, the picture that I'm best known for, right between Ali's legs is a great photographer named Herbie Schaufman. Herbie Schaufman probably took the second best known boxing picture of all time. It's called The Rubber Face. It's Rocky Marciano creaming Jersey Joe Walcott, I believe, and Walcott's face is contorted from the punch landing. Herbie was a great boxing photographer. Well, that night, he's looking up at Ali's rear end. I don't care how good he is. He's not getting the picture that I got. And my job, how you separate the good where the luck ceases, is when you're in the lucky seat, you're not supposed to miss. And I didn't miss that night.
Can we go back to that photo just for a second? Can I point something out here, Mauricio? If you look between Ali's legs, there's a guy in the foreground with glasses on. Neil probably knows exactly who that person is. I believe he was an AP writer. And behind him, you see somebody looking over his shoulder with his mouth wide open in shock and awe. And that is the young Larry Merchant.
Really? Right there. Look that way?
Jim, you are so right. Larry kept asking me for a print of that. And I was convinced he's trying to con me out of a print, because the magazine was very funny about making prints, and they sell photographic prints. And Larry kept saying to me, but I'm in that picture. And I didn't believe him. And then sure enough, he was the Philadelphia Inquirer writer. And that is Larry Merchant.
And that drop-jawed, mouth-open look of shock and awe was a Merchant trademark that lasted all the way through his career. And that is the perfect evocation of it right there. And this is one of the greatest sports photographs of all time. And remember that Ali is standing over Liston yelling, get up, you big ugly bear, get up. And you can see it and feel it right there. Amazing work, Neil.
Well, like I say, I got lucky, but I didn't miss. And that's what mattered, because you look at Herbie and you can see he's
in the wrong place.
He's in the wrong place.
Bob, I mean, not getting too far off the point, but that's Lewiston, Maine. Was that a legitimate KO, or was that Liston avoiding any further embarrassment?
Well, I wasn't in the audience then, and I picked up information on that fight only afterwards. So it's secondary. I want you to know that. I wasn't involved in that fight. I wasn't in boxing. According to Ali, he hit Liston with this grazing punch, and Liston went down. And could he have gotten up? Yes, but he decided to pack it in because he remembered the first fight and didn't want to take an embarrassing defeat. That's how it's been, I heard rumors that the Muslims had gotten to the Liston camp and they had threatened him. All nonsense. I don't know for sure, but I believe from what I learned, all nonsense. I really believe Ali hit him with a grazing punch. He legitimately went down. It wasn't a phantom punch. Maybe it wasn't a punch sufficient to knock out a true heavyweight like Liston. But Liston then refused to get up. He could have gotten up. And then it was, I think it was Jersey Joe Walcott was the referee. And he got confused. And that Fleischer told him that the count was, it became like a mess. But anyway, Liston was counted out. But again, Liston, as a typical bully, when he realized, based on the first fight and then the second, that he wasn't going to bully Ali, packed it in.
I believe, if I may give an opinion, you just touched on a very important point. The referee, Jersey Joe Walcott, he was a fighter. Back then, there was not really a true grooming of and training of referees. And he could have let that fight go. He went back and Liston was already up, and then he went to see the commission and back and forth, and then stopped the fight. And we have seen a couple of these bad situations that happen in the sport, but that is never going to be resolved. We had Arthur Mercante was the referee in the great fight of the century, one of the greatest ever. And that put a great seal for this great fight. I want to ask you a question, Mauricio. See, you're chesting out. Okay. We know that Jersey Joe Walcott was the referee in the first and the second Ali Liston fight. We know now, because we saw the picture, that the great Arthur Mercante was the referee in the first Ali Frazier fight. Who was the referee in the second Ali Frazier fight, the NABF fight, 12-round fight where Ali beat Frazier? Who was the referee? The third was... Second, give me a second. You got me. Tony Perez. Tony Perez, exactly. And the third fight we know was Padilla, because at that point, when I guess I was over there, I was a co-promoter with King, but typical King, I was in the background, King was in the front. And there was a whole big argument of who would be the referee. So they brought in 3 referees, Jay Edson at the time, Harry Gibbs, and Zach Clayton. They brought in the 3 referees. And the commission, the GAB in the Philippines came to me. And they said, what should we do as far as a referee? I said to them, you will be charged with supervision of this fight. There must be a Filipino who would be a good referee. And that's why they picked Padilla, who did an unbelievable job in one of the most brutal fights that I've ever seen. And then he went on to have a great career. In Vegas, yeah. We have a very special video that we want to show to then listen and see firsthand about this experience, this anecdote. So please join us to see this video.
Ironically, the Grand Hyatt House. And Ali was speaking that night to the Boxing Writers' Dinner, and I was the MC. And we had a green room. There were a lot of people in and out all day long. And late in the afternoon, I had to go out and run some errands in Manhattan. I was gone for about 2 hours, and I needed somebody to watch over and supervise my 8-year-old daughter while I was gone. And for those 2 hours, Muhammad Ali taught her magic tricks, played with her, kept her safe, babysat my daughter. And at the end of that period, she asked me, who is this man? And I said, someday you'll know. 10 years later, when she graduated as the valedictorian at the American School of London, all the graduates of that school in that year were asked for the graduation ceremony to pick a line of poetry to define them. And everybody's choosing Robert Barrett Browning or Robert Frost or Emily Dickinson. And my daughter's line was, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. And to this day, she floats like a butterfly, stings like a bee. Thank you. You're welcome.
So I don't know, Mauricio, if you can make out this photo. There you go. If you put that on the screen. This is
we're watching it.
And that is my daughter, Brooke, who was 8 years old, on the right side of the photo. And that is me in the center. And that is Ali with her, taken on exactly the day that I described in that anecdote you just showed. And, you know, when you have an idol, someone who deeply influences your life, as I described, Ali, when he was Cassius Clay, coming out of Rome, representing what he represented, what he meant to me, etc., you never expect the last thing you dream of is that you're going to meet that person and that you're going to talk with that person and that you're going to share personal observations with him and become his friend, and he's going to become your friend. And that happened to me. And it happened to me partially because of the unique accessibility of that man. If you asked him for something, he gave it to you. He would make his life available to a lot of people. I'm only one of probably tens of thousands of people who had similar experiences like that. So to this day, and this is the only photograph that I keep on my desk here in Chapel Hill, my reverence for him is immense and unshakable. And to this day, my daughter, who is vice chairman of Sotheby's art auction house in New York, and maybe the most successful art executive her age in the world, and if you were to describe her presence and her abilities as a business person, she floats like a butterfly and she stings like a bee.
Beautiful. That's so beautiful.
Yeah, and Jim brings back a memory that I had. When I I was introduced to Ali in 1965 I became friendly with the great football player Jim Brown. And Brown introduced me to Ali, and subsequently I became his lawyer and promoter. This was 1965, before he made that statement about having nothing against the Viet Cong and the whole thing getting thrown out of Chicago, thrown out of the country. But I remember I was living at that time in Manhattan, at an apartment in Manhattan on 72nd Street. I was married to my first wife, and I had two young sons. And in those days, we kept a kosher house. That means under Jewish dietary laws, which are the same basically as the Muslim laws, halal. And so, and when Ali and Herbert would come to New York for a weekend, they always called me up to come to Friday night Shabbat dinner at my house. And I have pictures of Ali with my two boys, you know, his arms around them. And, you know, that's something that's unforgettable.
Unbelievable. Jimmy, tell us your greatest memory, anecdote, conversation, moment with Muhammad Ali.
Yes, a number of them. I'm very fortunate to have a number of them. But I think one that was most impactful is we were in Jakarta, Indonesia, and he and Howard Bingham and Lonnie invited me over to their suite to watch the fight. It was Chavez versus Meldrick Taylor, their first fight. But I was there for a while, and then the transmission cut off, believe it or not. Never saw the end of the fight. But Muhammad sat there and, like it was the first time, explained to me his whole life story, how he, you know, met Sugar Ray Robinson, and he was his idol, and how he kind of snuffed him, and he promised that he would never do that to anyone else. He told me about him becoming a Muslim, and then he proceeded to show me some magic tricks, one at a time. And after each magic trick, I was thinking I was going to be very polite and pretend like, oh, he really fooled me, but he really fooled me. And they were good magic tricks. And then he showed me how to do each magic trick, because in his beliefs, you don't fool people. You actually, you know, show them what it is. And, you know, that time in Indonesia was tremendous. And, you know, I know Neil was talking about the gregarious nature of him and how he would turn it on when anyone was around. We did go to a party in Jakarta before the event. And it was so hot. I've never been so hot in my life. And it was all outdoors. And as soon as the cars arrived for us to leave, we all felt so great to be in an air-conditioned car. And Ali's car was in front of mine. And as we're driving away with the police escort, you see this brown hand sticking out of his car with the windows down. And he's there waving to all of the people as we're passing by. You could just see the faces on these people just glow and light up. You cannot believe that Muhammad Ali was doing that. And I'm looking at myself being so selfish, thinking, I need this air conditioning. Forget all those people. And you know, he was an inspiration with that, the way he treated people.
I'll tell you a quick story. I want to tell a story that fits in very well with the Vietnam story that Bob was saying. Frank DeFord decided to do a piece on Howard Bingham, great photographer and Ali's best friend. And I was assigned to shoot the cover, and I was a friend of Howard's as well as Ali's. It was a wonderful time, and we traveled. I shot them in Berrien Springs, Michigan, and whatever. But Ali was getting an award in Washington, D.C. I don't remember what the award was. It was a black tie dinner, and he was being given a very prestigious award. And Frank and I and Howard and Lonnie were there. We were all in the same hotel. And the next morning, we were going to head back to the airport and fly to South Bend, which is where you went if you were going to Berrien Springs, Michigan, is home. Anyway, I came up with it. We were in Ali's suite, just the five of us. And I said, we're going to the airport. I know we're going to pass the Vietnam Memorial. I said, it'd be a hell of a picture. Would Muhammad like to go there? And he wasn't speaking so well by then, the Parkinson's had taken, but he liked that idea right away. And he said, yes, I want to do that. And Frank DeFord, who was one of my dearest friends, was adamant that this was a bad idea. There are going to be people there. Someone's liable to spit at him. We're going to create a scene. Neil, it's not a good idea. I don't remember whether Lonnie was a judge and jury, but we decided to do it. And we got in a limousine to go to the airport, and we stopped. If you're very close, you could be right along the road that is adjacent to the wall. Got out of the wall. It was about 10 in the morning. We had plenty of time to get to the airport. It's on the way to the airport anyway. But I wanted to get Ali to the wall, and my was going to be Howard Bingham taking a picture of Muhammad at the wall. I had that all planned, and Howard was cool with it. And we got out of the car, and as we got out of the car, there was a group of Girl Scouts, probably, I thought, too young to know Ali, across the street. The last thing in the world I wanted to do was have people see him before I got my pictures. Well, if one of the girls says, isn't that Muhammad Ali? And pretty soon he was posing with the entire Girl Scout troop. And so I finally dragged him out of the middle, got him over to the wall, took a few pictures, and Frank is saying, Neil, let's get out of here. There are people, you know, they etched the name of their, whoever it was, one of their sons or husbands or brothers that lost his life in Vietnam. And people were sort of not paying it. There weren't that many people close to where we were, but we were right in front of the wall. I remember Ali's first reaction. He said, they all died. He was stunned at the number of names that were on the wall. But at that point, somebody who was there to see a son or a husband or whatever who had died in the war spotted Ali and said, that's Muhammad Ali. And pretty soon we had 2 people, then we had 4 people. And I'll never forget this. Every one of them either wanted his autograph or to pose for a picture. There wasn't one negative comment. And I would think, other than Jane Fonda, I don't know who you could have brought to the wall that day that you would have expected. I mean, Frank loved Ali as I did. And that was why Frank DeFord was so much against doing this. And he was magical. There was something about him because, again, maybe it wasn't a good idea to take him to the wall. It turned out to be a good idea.
It was a good idea. It was a good idea because by that time, the public realized what a lot of us had realized when it was going on, that it was the stupidest thing ever that cost the lives of so many young Americans.
Exactly.
And so people, even those who had lost loved ones in the war, realized instinctively that what Ali was saying was correct. And if they had listened to people like Ali and other people who were advocating against the war, their loved ones might not have died. And another thing that people don't realize, you think of the Vietnam War and the people that died, a disproportionate number of Americans who fought in that war were Black Americans who died at the same rate, if not a greater rate, than white Americans. There's a picture that's out recently by Spike Lee that you got to see. It's called The Five Bloods. Sensational, about Black Americans in Vietnam who come back to Vietnam. Really great picture.
You were talking about the magic. I want to show a picture that we found. I'm sure anyone, whoever was with Muhammad Ali, experienced the great moment of having to witness his magic. Let me put it on the screen. That night, we visited Muhammad in his house in Los Angeles. It was my father and Victor Cota and some people. Remember that he would do with the handkerchief?
Yes. Well, that's a great photo. What a great memory. And you know, he's having more fun than anyone with it. You can see in his face right there. He just loved to trick people and have fun with them, get their reaction. And I'll be honest with you, I still entertain kids with some of the tricks that he did, especially some of the card tricks that he showed me. So, great man.
I'm sure you have the one with the finger and the handkerchief pulling out.
Yeah. It surprised me how easy that one was, how simple it was.
Bob, tell us your favorite story. I mean, you must have thousands of moments with Ali. Is there something what's first that comes to your mind?
And I'll never forget it was 1966, and we were in London. He had fought Henry Cooper and knocked him out in Arsenal's stadium. And then Jack Solomon, the other promoter in England, signed Ali up to fight Brian London. And Ali was staying at the Marble Arch Hotel and training in Hyde Park. And one day, Herbert Muhammad, his manager, came to see me and he said, "Bob, Ali has been invited to the home of this fabulously rich Pakistani who would become a US citizen, the richest Pakistani in the United Kingdom, and he's invited us over for Sunday lunch, and Muhammad would like you to come with us." So I said, fine. So the three of us are in this limousine, small limousine, we had a driver, and we're driving for about 45 minutes, and we're in this really lower class area with these small row houses, really lower middle class area. So I'm telling Herbert, this guy don't know where he's going, the driver. He's driving us the right way. The guy said, I know exactly where I'm going. And he deposited us up in front of one of these poor little houses. And the guy comes out and invites us in. And he had a young daughter. And obviously he wasn't who he said he was. It wasn't this wealthy man. And we came in and they had a little table. And there was room for maybe 4 people on the table. So we had to take turns sitting at the table to have lunch. Ali went over to the piano, played the piano, did magic tricks for like at least an hour. And we were there for like 2.5, 3 hours. So we left and I said to Ali, I said, Muhammad, they really took you for a ride, didn't they? He says, Bob, listen, I was in that situation. These people will never forget the experience. I won't forget the experience. He said, Ali wouldn't forget the experience. It doesn't harm to be gracious. This is what I'm put on earth for, to make people happy. And this was, how many years ago? This was 34 years. Over 50, almost 55 years ago. And I still remember that day, not because of what happened, but because of what Ali said to me. I was the tough guy, Ali, you got taken advantage. And he said, no, I didn't. look how I pleased these people, and look how I made them.
That's a great story.
That's a great story.
And I am sure each one in this panel can easily know immediately where you were at the moment of the news of Muhammad Ali passing away. Where were you, Mr. Lampley, Jim Lampley, where were you? How did you find out he had passed away?
I was in Carson, California, getting ready for a big fight, a top-ranked fight, Bob Arum's fight. Bob, it was the, you remind me, it was the second fight between the two great Mexican fighters. Names aren't coming to me right now, but Bob will know.
Herrera?
No,
it was a later generation than those two guys, not Barrera and Morales. It was, well, at any rate, it was the guy who came in as an immigrant and went back and forth several times, Bob, and you helped him get ultimately a green card for his family to come into the United States. What's that?
Ray Beltran.
Yeah. So I was getting ready to call that fight, and Ali died the night before. And one of the toughest parts of my job on HBO for all those years was the eulogy at the end of the telecast. You know, I had gone through a lot of these, you know, eulogies talking about people who died, and as everybody knows, I have difficulty concealing my emotions. And I remember thinking, oh my God, how in the world am I going to do this? So, but we got through it. It worked out okay. It was June 4, 2016, I believe.
Where were you, Jimmy?
My wife, Lovey, had been very friendly with, as still is, with Lonnie. And so we knew Ali was really sick, and Lonnie called Lovey to tell her that Muhammad had passed. That's how I found out.
And you were at home?
Again, I'm not sure where I was, but Ali at that point was on his last legs, and his passing was inevitable at that point. It wasn't like a sudden thing.
How about you, Neil?
Oh, my story is pretty interesting. I knew, like Bob, I knew Ali was quite sick. And the lady I was dating at the time was dying to meet him. And Lonnie invited us. She said, well, you better come on out. They were in Paradise Valley in Arizona. And I was about to go to Los Angeles for some other reason. And I made a point of stopping in Phoenix so I could go see Ali. And we were going to have dinner. He would go out occasionally, but we were going to meet at the house and go out to dinner. My girlfriend, myself, and Lonnie and Muhammad. And we got there, and it was set for the next day. We were going to come over to the house. And Lonnie called me in the morning. I think Ali had fallen out of bed. I'm not sure. And he was sort of banged up a little bit, I believe. But Lonnie said to me, listen, Neil, he's not feeling so well today. I think let's do it tomorrow, but we'll have dinner. And we went to dinner, the three of us, Lonnie and my girlfriend and I went to dinner. And she said, we're going to be there for a couple of days. She said, tomorrow will be fine. Well, the next day, the same thing happened. He wasn't feeling well. I don't believe he didn't get out of bed all day. And she just called, and she was so nice. She said, Neil, she said, I just can't have you by the house. Because she had invited us to come. Yeah. Anyway, so I flew to Los Angeles, and believe it or not, a strange coincidence, I'm having dinner with Michael Buffer in a restaurant, and somebody called me, a friend called me, and Jay Cantor called me to say Muhammad had just passed away. It was 2 days after I'd left Phoenix, and that's how I heard.
But it was inevitable, as you said. We all knew it was just a matter of time.
Yeah, he was going downhill, and you could really see it. And I remember preparing for the 10 count that we did for him, and thinking back that, you know what, I had been kind of thinking about this 10 count boxing tribute for a long time. And it was something that, as you said, Bob, he was going downhill, and it was inevitable.
Yeah, I remember at the end, we did this big dinner in Las Vegas, The Power of Love, for brain studies and
The Cleveland Clinic
and everything. And that year we honored Muhammad Ali. And so Larry Ruvo, who was the driving force behind the Cleveland Clinic, Lou Ruvo Brain Center, had asked me to do what I can to get all the people that Ali fought to Las Vegas to be part of this celebration. We had all the great acts and everything. And so I got a hold of Chuck Wepner, Leon Spinks lived in Vegas, Ernie Shavers, George Chavallo, had them all that I could round up came to Las Vegas. And it was a wonderful tribute, great entertainment. I remember Whitney Houston had a funeral that Saturday morning, and Stevie Wonder had flown commercial to Vegas to be part of the tribute. And his role was they brought Ali on stage, and he was not in good shape. And Stevie Wonder sang Happy Birthday to him. Sugar Ray Leonard, and the Fighters, and Tommy Hearns, and Beckham, the great soccer player, was there. And we rolled out this huge birthday cake. And I went up to Ali and I put my arm around him. And I'll never forget it. It makes me cry now. He looked at me, and I have the picture, and he said, "I love you." Say that to me. And for me, that was the greatest moment in my boxing career.
Let's talk a little bit about Frazier now.
Yeah.
Isn't that something? This is about the Frazier Ali fight. And, because he was so larger than life, he was so, in a world and in a culture that exceeds by far any of us, we tend always to come back to Muhammad Ali. Always.
Yep.
Joe Frazier was a very, very, very nice guy.
Yeah.
I mean, the only time I didn't root for Joe Frazier was when he fought Ali. You could not like Frazier. You almost felt sorry for him coming along at the time that Muhammad was so special. He was a really good guy. I mean, I remember I rooted for Frazier every single fight I covered of his, except the Ali fights.
Yeah, but again, Neil, if it wasn't for Ali, we wouldn't remember Joe Frazier particularly.
You're right. Right.
I mean, same way, Larry Holmes was a great fighter, Lennox Lewis a great fighter, but they'll fade into history, maybe a footnote at best. But Frazier won't, because of his connection to Muhammad Ali.
You're right.
And you look at that fight, the fight of the century, and the kind of condition that Joe Frazier was in, the number of punches he threw, the body and head movement that he maintained throughout the fight, and the huge left hand. I mean, what a performance that was that night. And he was really never the same after that fight. They both suffered tremendous damage.
Yeah, but again, Frazier really, really suffered, I think, the ultimate debilitation when he fought Ali in Manila. That
absolutely
completely finished off. And Ali was never the same fighter after that fight in Manila. He fought Norton in Yankee Stadium, you remember? And he struggled. He barely beat Norton, if he beat him at all. And it wasn't the same Ali.
There's a quote in my boxing book that's attributed to Ali. I never heard that quote before, but Muhammad was asked about the fight in Manila, and he said, we both went to Manila as champions, as world champions. We came back as old men.
Yeah, but his great quote was, "I never experienced before going through death."
Right.
Did that fight.
Well, as a 21-year-old watching the first fight in Madison Square Garden, I learned something about the geometry of boxing that stayed with me and stayed in my mind throughout the whole rest of my career. Because if you look back at that tail of the tape that we showed earlier, the reach advantage was 7.5 or 8 inches. And it looked bigger. Ali was longer, taller, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember thinking, well, how in the world is Joe going to get close and land the left hook, which was, of course, his primary, almost his exclusive weapon. And you watch the way he develops elusiveness. You watch the way he uses his foot movement to get to places where he can throw the left hook with balance, with timing, and put power on it. It's almost like magic that he was able to do that. And, you know, later on, we saw fighters with that kind of elusiveness in the heavyweight division. The early Tyson was able to get inside against taller guys when it might not have appeared that he was going to be able to do it. But nobody, to my way of thinking, was ever as effective in doing that against a taller guy as Frazier was, and landing that left hook over and over and over when you really had to be a scientist of boxing to understand the level of skill and determination that it took to be able to do it.
The reason, Jim, I didn't give Frazier any chance going into that fight is because I was aware of his fights with Oscar Bonavena. And Bonavena, at least one of those fights, clearly won the fight. And they gave the decision to Frazier because Bonavena was about Frazier's size and took a great punch and nullified Frazier's power. Brutal fights, but Bonavena, I thought, won at least one of those fights. And Ali, even though the fight with Bonavena was fairly close, Ali was clearly the dominant fighter when he fought Bonavena. But again, you know, just because fighter A has trouble with fighter C and fighter B doesn't have trouble with that much trouble with fighter C, doesn't really translate when the two fighters meet.
Do you remember?
Oldest truism in the sport: styles make fights.
Exactly.
And,
right. Exactly.
That's what I was just going to say. The fact is that Ali fought how many rounds with Joe Frazier and never put him on the canvas. He fought 2 12-round fights and two 15-round fights and 1 12-round fight, and one and never put him on the canvas. And George Foreman put him down, what, 5, 6 times? I forgot how many times he went down in Kingston.
George Foreman lived on fighting smaller guys.
Yeah, but you couldn't miss
Tyson. He would have knocked Tyson out.
Any one of the 5 or 6 of us could have hit Joe Frazier. He was right in front of you. He stood right. He came in. We could hit him. You just had to be able to take what he was throwing back.
And Jerry Quarry was a better boxer than Frazier.
Yeah, and Foreman could hit a ton.
I saw in that picture a lot of people wearing a red cap. What was that?
Wasn't Donald Trump then? It wasn't Donald Trump.
That was the credential. That was the credential that got you in the post-fight dressing room.
Yeah.
All ringside press had the red hat. If you didn't have the red hat, you couldn't get into the post-fight press conference.
That was John Conlon, right? John Conlon.
Exactly. Yes.
But I want to also say something about that fight. Give credit where credit is due. Jerry Perenchio came from nowhere to promote that fight. And he changed boxing irrevocably with that fight. Put boxing on a totally different scale. He told people that if you had an attraction, the price wasn't all that important. People will pay. Perenchio, I remember, he paid the fighters $5 million. He had an incredible amount that he spent then for promotion, like $2.5 million. And he took in $18 million. Jerry made over $10 million in the fight. 60% went to Jack Kent Cooke, and the rest of it was Jerry Perenchio. And look what happened. He bought a Spanish television station. He ended up owning Univision, and he died a number of years ago, a multi-billionaire. And his fortune was made, the beginning of his fortune was when he promoted Frazier and Ali in Madison Square Garden on March 8th. And it's a great, great story of an American businessman who took a real shot and turned it into, a tremendous business career.
He actually had another idea. He had another idea that I thought was brilliant, and I'm sure you were involved in it, Bob, is that he did not sell Jimmy Jacobs at big fights. They used to buy the right to have the film rights to the fight. Perenchio didn't sell those film rights. He hired two feature film cameramen and directors. One would stay with Frazier, one stayed with Ali. They were going to release a feature film of the fight before the rematch, because obviously the public was going to want to see Frazier Ali too.
Yeah, when
he never counted on Foreman. But the footage of that of the two different camera crews that he hired is some of the best fight footage you'll ever see.
And he never would sell the rights to that fight until at the end he sold them to ABC. So
yeah, but having the same film.
Jerry Perenchio had a foresight that none of us who were then involved in boxing had.
Well, we have gone through the beauty of the memory. I would like to plant a seed right now with the four of you and invite you to do this again one of these days.
At the 60th anniversary, right?
Yeah.
I would have. You got a deal. I make the deal right now.
Okay, we just bought a bunch of years for all of us.
And count me in.
Okay.
And
I just wanted
I look forward to it.
So I would like to do a last round of comments, whatever you like to say. And this has been magical, and it's going to be magical. And people, the stories that we have heard today and we're listening are heartwarming and inspires, because that was a moment in life that will never come back, but live in the memories. And as long as we talk about Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, they are alive. And what you have shared today is just unbelievable. So we're going to do a last recap. Who would like to begin?
I'd like to bounce off what you said. You said they will be alive because of the memories of this fight. I think all of boxing benefits from this fight. It was a tremendous, tremendous fight. And I thank you for putting this panel on. What a pleasure it was to listen to those of you who were there, and Jim, who was so impressed by Ali and the fight itself. It was great to be part of this. I think it was the biggest sporting event that has ever occurred in the history of sports. And what an honor to speak about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jimmy. Neil, please go ahead.
Well, first, Mauricio, my friend Mauricio, I've got to tell you what an honor it is for me to be included in this panel. Sadly, photographers are usually simply not even thought of for something like this. And I am just so flattered that you would think of me this way. Mauricio's been very good to me for a number of years, but what a nice group to be with. I remember when Ed Brophy called to tell me that I'd been elected to the Hall of Fame. I've never been so excited in my life, and this is almost as good. And I will remember this forever. Thank you so much for including me.
And what a beautiful book you have put together. It's unbelievable.
Unbelievable book. You're right. Unbelievable book. Neil sent me a complimentary copy. I then bought a number of copies to send to my friends. Everybody has been, who got one of them from me, called me up. It was better than cases of champagne. They were so excited. They all loved it, couldn't put it down. Great, great job. I recommend it to everybody.
Well, I got very lucky. Tashin does the best books in the world. They are the Muhammad Ali of book publishing and the greatest of all time. So I got lucky, and 60 years of my fight pictures is just a thrill for me.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Jim,
Thank
please.
So, I've had, excuse me, an incredibly lucky life. I was 21 at the time of the fight. Excuse me. I made it to network television by accident, really, at age 25 in 1974, covering college football. I worked for 12 years at ABC Sports, never, ever expecting to do anything in boxing. Howard Cosell called the fights. I would have been crazy to even mention the word in the building at 1330 6th Avenue. New management came in the middle 80s, and new management decided, among other things, that they wanted to get rid of me. So a new division president was looking for a way to make me uncomfortable and caused me to leave ABC. And he thought that I wouldn't like boxing, thought that I wouldn't know anything about it, thought that calling fights would be a very uncomfortable experience for me. So he assigned me to call fights. The first fight I ever called was Mike Tyson versus Jesse Ferguson in Glens Falls, New York. Partially as the result of my background as a child, my mother sitting me down to watch Sugar Ray Robinson in 1955 when I was 6 years old, I did like boxing. And I don't know why they thought that I wouldn't. And I went on to have the most amazingly rewarding and spiritually rich life imaginable. I still talk about boxing every day. I just don't do it on camera or on a microphone anymore, but it's still in my heart and soul every minute. And I'm going to agree with Jimmy Lennon. Competitively, in terms of the personalities of the combatants, and especially socio-politically, it was the single biggest sports event in my lifetime. And I'm going to agree with Jimmy that it was the single biggest sports event in the history of the society. So to have the opportunity to talk about it in this way, and particularly with Neil and Bob, who were there at the time, is a great privilege. And I'm grateful to you, Mauricio, for bringing us all together and inviting me to be a part.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And
Bob?
in my connection and experience and the time I spent with Ali, obviously is an indelible portion of my life, which I look back with great reverence and memories. And certainly I remember watching, it's where I was sitting when this great fight with Ali and Frazier took place on March 8th in the Garden. And I'll never forget it. But remember, I'm a boxing promoter, so shamelessly, I will equate great Ali Frazier fight with a forthcoming fight that I will be promoting this summer between the Gypsy King, Tyson Fury, and Anthony Joshua. And I will remind the public of how great that fight will be by equating it to the Ali Frazier fight. But the truth is, there's Tyson. The truth is that I will never, ever see a fight as important and as world-shaking as the fight between Ali and Frazier in March 8th of 1971.
Wow, what a way to end this program. I want to send you all my heart. Thank you so much for giving us such a beautiful afternoon, this knowledge. And I just want to finish by saying we're going through a process in life. We're going to make it through. Bob has received both vaccines.
So is Neil. So is Neil.
Good.
One benefit about being a little older than these guys.
So we're going to look back at a dark time that humanity lived, but we are shining today and we're celebrating life through boxing. So let's all join with the 2021 Year of Boxing. Let's continue to honor those who made what we live through those memories. One, the greatest 50 years of Ali, Frazier, Bob Arum, Don King turning 90 this year. And there's so many celebrations that throughout the year we're going to continue to share and celebrate. I want to wish you all happiness, safety, health, and that let's move on and continue being friends. And just thank you so very much for giving us this time. And I send you something that we have implemented through this technology, okay? We are far away, but still we're very close. So let's get a little close to the camera and get a hug each other.
Yes.
And you can feel it. Yes.
Right.
Okay. Thank you so much, and we'll be in touch.
Oh, thank you so
much. Good day, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye. Thank you, Mauricio. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, fans, here we go with the main event of the evening, the fight of the century, Muhammad Ali. Smoking Joe Frazier. It's showtime.